Hello and welcome back to the Talking Leadership TV podcast series. Thank you for joining us again. Our guest today is Russell Harvey. Russell is also known as the Resilience Coach. He's a leadership coach and facilitator, a public speaker, managing director, podcaster, and radio host. He brings over 20 years of experience in the learning, leadership, and organizational development space. In particular, his areas of specialization are resilience, executive coaching and leader development, talent management, and career coaching, as well as facilitation, change, leadership, and creativity. He's worked with a range of clients, including the NHS, BT, the Cooperative Group and Bank, W.M. Morrison's, and the Great Ormond Street Hospital. I really enjoyed the podcast today with Russell looking at reflective leadership practice from his perspective. But as always, enough from me, and I'd like to hand over to today's guest, Russell Harvey.
Russell Harvey, thank you for joining me on the podcast today, mate. Welcome.
Right. Absolute pleasure, Eric. Thank you very much for having me on. It's nice to have the opportunity to chat with you.
Brilliant. And so I'm recording this from not so sunny in the evening Brisbane, and I'm talking to you from Leeds. So this is an international episode of the podcast, which I'm very glad to get out to the world. But today, my friend, we're going to be talking about reflective leadership practice. And just as a bit of a reminder for those that are following the podcast or listening to it in the audio version, that the new themes that I'm trying to investigate, at least this year, are important to me because they've come from previous discussions with leaders right across the spectrum, and reflective leadership practice seem to have come up either directly or indirectly in the conversations I've had. So I'm looking forward to having this chat with you. Now, I'll begin by asking you, you've met, obviously, or I'll put something to you first. You've obviously met leaders in your travels. You've seen what constitutes good and bad practice in leadership practice. And I just want to get from you your perceptions of how well or not so well reflective practices undertaken by those leaders you've met. Again, don't need to name anyone, but just from your
Yeah.
experiences, Russell. Yeah.
So I think it starts at the good reflective practice starts with good self-awareness. So that's part of the answer to the question for me. How well they do it is immediately on sort of their self-awareness. To also answer your question in brief, not very well at all in general, and it is part of the reason why coaches, people like myself, we are in a role, we have a job because we can support people to get much, much better at their self-reflection. And it just really interests me, the vast majority of the time when clients come to me and say, oh, I need some support, or my team's not working. So the classic one is, let's say, oh, my team's not performing. My initial response will to be is something along the lines of, okay, and what role do you think you play in that? The second, the way in which they answer that immediately, if they immediately sort of go, yeah, no, absolutely, I know, I'm completely, yeah, totally, that's part of it, valid question, that's part of why I want to talk to you. I'm immediately going, okay, good, I think we can start in a really great place with this individual. If the individual goes, what are you on about? It's like, no, they're all just a bunch of idiots, and we need to get them sort of working better. I'm going, okay, we're going to take a different route around this. And somebody else might say, yeah, I had a funny feeling you would ask me that question. I was sort of hoping that you wouldn't, but now that you have, all right, then let's go down that route. Our ultimate self-awareness about the type of leader that we currently are, any thinking that we've already done on actually what's the type of leader I want to be, what's my leadership goals, what's my leadership purpose, then that's going to enable some reflection in a useful and a helpful way. And part of the reason why I think I think the human race is not great at reflection, so we're not having a criticism of leaders. I think it's really good for listeners and watchers straight away to just remember or know for the first time that we have about 50,000 thoughts a day, and over half of them are negative, and 90% of our thoughts today are from yesterday, and lo and behold, they'll be in the negative space predominantly as well. So reflection, you have got to be really mindful that you're not going to go into a negativity spiral, a beating up spiral. And one of the specific dimensions of being resilient, I use this word meaning, as in, what's the meaning that we are attaching to events? What's the internal stories that we're telling ourselves about actually our experiences, what we're doing, what we're not doing? So it's the basic answer to the question about how are you, or how was your day, or how's project going, or how's this week going. It's noticing how you answer that, because in the United Kingdom, um, it's different in the States. I think it's a bit mixed in Australia. I think, about the immediate response. Is it more in the useful, helpful, worthwhile, optimistic space, or is it immediately in the, yeah, everything's awful and it's not going well? So there's some cultural bits that sort of come into it as well. But short answer to your question, we're not great at it as human beings. And the leaders that I engage with, we support them to get an awful lot better at it.
There are some very interesting things you raised there. The one that sort of jumped out at me is that cultural differentiation. I have no research to back me on this. I would assume that culture factors play some role in your ability to reflect, whether or not the culture around you is supportive of self-reflection. But I think,
Yes.
going back to what you said at the beginning, that most human beings, let's just not isolate leaders here, that being self-reflective, I think, is a very much a purposeful act. You're going to want
Yeah.
to reflect, and you have to be aware that you're reflecting. And then I think at that meta level, why are you reflecting? So is the
Yeah.
reflection to get better at what you're doing, or to look at what happened and to learn something from it? And uh, my personal view here, only personal, I think you need to spend time on what that process is for you, because in previous discussions around this, and I'd love to get your take on this if I can, Russell, is what does good quality reflection look like? And is there such a thing as bad quality reflection when you're getting into that space, particularly from a leader point of view? And why I ask this is I have some people that I put on a pedestal that I know, for me, are what the archetype really good leader is. And I don't think that they're aware themselves, or at least I haven't asked the question. So again, it's a personal view, that they're very good at reflecting, and they'll bring you in to that reflective space and not know that they're doing it. And at the end of the conversation, I sort of turn around and go, "Oh, I've had a session here talking to a really good leader, and they've proposed some things and asked me to test
Mm.
some thinking." And yeah, it's interesting to me in that space that um, I've never asked those leaders that I put on that pedestal, what is good quality reflection for you versus bad? And I'll put that to you as my guest today, mate. What does good look like, and what does bad look like?
So there's a couple of things to remind me later that when you were speaking, there was something around confirmation bias. So just remind me to
Sure,
come back
sure.
to that later. Okay. Um, so really great quality reflection. So it's openness and curiosity. So what will drive really great quality reflection is thinking about your natural human state. How open and curious are you? Okay. Because that naturally drives broadening and deepening the questions that you'll ask of others and yourself, and the conversations that you'll have. So, everybody's listening, watching now, be curious about how curious you are. You know, and if straight away people are listening going, what on earth are you on about? It's like, okay, there's a real great opportunity there for you to become more open and curious. So ask more questions, essentially. Ask more open questions. Let's caveat that. Please ask more open questions. So really great quality reflection is going to come from, so another dimension of being resilient is having a purpose. Okay. So it's, have you got a purpose? And also for leaders listening, actually, have you got a leadership purpose? Have you got something like a pledge? Your head, your heart, and your gut are in alignment about who, your humanity, your values, the type of leader that you're going to be, because that's going to give you something useful, worthwhile, and helpful to reflect against. It's going to give you a blueprint to go, actually, the point and purpose of my reflection is, how am I doing against my purpose? So quality reflection needs to have some purpose to it, i.e., have a purpose around it. And then for me, really great reflection. I know I'm biased because I'm in the resilience space. So I define resilience as springing forward with learning. So reflection has to include learning, in it. It's not just, yeah, this happened and that happened, move on. It's actually, what did I learn from it? What am I going to keep doing that worked really well for me? Behaviorally, or playing to my strengths, or the people that I collaborated with, or who was in my support network at the time. And what are the things that I'm going to stop doing? Because actually, in my recent experiences, they didn't work well for me. So to be able to achieve this definition of resilience, springing forward with learning, you need to get into the habit from all of life's experiences, the good ones and the not so good ones, of pausing and then having a conversation either with yourself, self-reflection, or with somebody else. And in both of those, be open and curious. But please do start with building upon the good. So because we've got this negativity bias, 50,000 thoughts, you have to consciously and overtly start with what's going well. What was good? What was right? What did I manage to achieve? Even if it feels like the situation you're in is just absolutely horrific and awful, then you still got to turn around and go, okay, well, the only positive I can find in this is that literally I survived. I got through it. What went well, and then start to consider the things that you could do differently. So really great reflection. It cultivates optimism as a route to feeling more positive. So optimism is grounded in reality. So in your reflections, whilst you are reflecting on what went well, you also have to be clear about actually your current reality. What's the real genuine current state of the circumstances that I am in? So you're not doing any sort of head in the stand or ostrich or anything like that. It's being really open and honest and being okay with that. So there's a big bunch of emotional intelligence that comes in, that if we're reflecting on the reality of this is really difficult and challenging, we haven't necessarily got to tip that into, oh my God, I feel awful. It's like, right, I've got some strong feelings about this, which I need to process. Then in your reflections about what's good and what's right, you absolutely spend a lot of time yourself and with your team on our strengths, our skills, our capabilities, our attitude, our mindset, our resilience, our experiences. What did we manage to do, and what have we managed to do in the past, and what have we got? And there's going, actually, I'm now genuinely feeling hopeful that we can face into this challenge. And it's like, I'm now getting feelings of positivity. So don't do toxic positivity of just be positive regardless, because that doesn't work. Start with your optimism. So really great reflection is make sure that you've got something that you're reflecting against, i.e. your purpose. Start with the good, take a strengths-based approach, and cultivate openness and curiosity and optimism. That's what really great reflection is to me.
Sure, and that gives you a template for what bad or not quite so good reflection might look like. So thank you for answering the second part of that.
I think, just literally, yes, yeah.
And it makes sense, but everything you've outlined there requires some time and investment of your own energy to understand and unpack that. One observation I would make is there's the self-reflective bit, and then there's the seeking feedback from others as part of that reflection process. And that can be exceedingly difficult if you potentially have a easily bruisable ego, or you're not ready to hear that less biased perspective. And that one is always interesting to me because whilst I've heard friends who are in leadership roles say, I welcome feedback, I love it, I need
Yeah,
it. Um,
yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to hear. And also, you really genuinely have to create an atmosphere where that can come in, that allows the third party to provide you with that feedback. And where I'm going with this is some leaders will choose to get that feedback from those that they lead. And I think that can be fraught with danger because are you going to tell the boss the warts and all of a situation, or are you going to hold back? And there's that potential danger. And then there's, I guess, the benefit of if you go to colleagues or a coach or someone who's helping you better your leadership practice, they're going to have no investment necessarily in offending your feelings because this is about understanding where you're coming from, and that is a mix of facts and feelings post an event, post a situation. And what that leads me to is to ask you, do we tend to reflect as people and include leaders in this when we've had some kind of major event or catastrophe or some major win, the triggers for reflection? Or and if that is the case, then does that put into context that reflection isn't something we do often because we need those triggers necessarily to get us in that headspace? Am I overthinking
I
that
would
one?
I would go with you, Eric. I really would. So whilst this word resilience is being talked about an awful lot more in the world, great, brilliant, uh, massive opportunity to actually talk about it a lot better. The challenge is that the vast majority of the time people don't know, well, all of the time, we don't know how resilient we are until a bad thing happens. It's just therefore I'm in the space of why wait for the bad thing to happen? I'm biased. I'm in the space of like, actually, why don't you choose to do proactive resilience today, right now? Why don't you choose to immediately work upon, and engage with your resilience today, right now? Because when, unfortunately, this unpleasant thing happens, you'll be in a much, much, much better place to face into it and to deal with it, and for it to actually not be as bad. So yeah, it's because resilience is absolutely, whilst I talk about spring forward with learning, it is about recovering from adverse events. Now, it does, and it doesn't always have to be really bad adverse events. It was as a woman one time just asked the question. I'm Holly White, and it's a woman for a particular reason. She sort of said, "Oh, adverse events." She says, "Does it have to be something really bad, in terms of it?" She says, "No, no, it doesn't." So I said, "Tell me what about what you're thinking?" And she sort of said, "Well, I recently became a mother, and it is, and it was absolutely fantastic to be a mother and giving birth. I would put it in an adverse event space." And I'll go, yeah, yeah, absolutely, great point. And I asked to say, can I steal that for future reference and future examples? And she went, yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. So it doesn't always have to be really horrible. Adverse is like it was a challenge. You got to recover from the event. And yeah, most time then clients come to us in terms of when people access coaching. It is often the case that they've had the tap on the shoulder to go, "Oh, we've got you a coach," and they sort of go, "Why? Why? What's wrong with me?" You know, it's like, well, I would just think you might need one, or somebody for the first time hasn't got a promotion. And it's like the first time ever they've not got a promotion, or they've had a piece of feedback for the first time around, actually, you need to do something around your leadership style because it's causing us problems. You know. Um, so the reason that people might start doing the reflection, it is too often got some negative connotation to it. Therefore, I am absolutely pleased people watching and listening now, you know, how would your life be better if you choose today, right now, to proactively engage with this word resilience, what will you have more of? How will your life be better? And there's hundreds of thousands of things that you could put down for that answer. So what would work for you to make the choice to go, do you know what? Probably on a weekly basis, I'm going to do some proactive reflection about, what's good about me and what's right about me, and actually how do I improve and build my resilience?
Yeah, that's and thank you for that. That could lead me down several rabbit holes, but we'll stick to the
Rabbit holes
leadership.
are good.
We'll
Yeah.
stick to the leadership one if we can. I take from what you say there that not only is better reflective leader practice something that is very much top of thinking if you're going to make your own leadership practice better, but it's understanding what are the benefits to you and the people around you around building your own and I'll steal your wording here, your own resilience um, in the lead up to potential events. Now, when I asked the question, I should have been more clear, and this is the host's fault, not the guest's fault, is when I say events, I don't necessarily mean that they have to be catastrophic, although that's part of it. It can be small little adverse things that happen in the world of work or an interaction you might have had with a subordinate or someone more senior to you. And those are very real things. You talked about not getting that promotion or getting tapped on the shoulder and saying, hey, we need you to use a leadership coach, or what's wrong with me? Instantly you go to the negative rather than saying, hey, we see lots more potential in you, but it looks like
Yeah.
there's a opportunity here to build on your leadership toolkit, if we can use that terminology. And that I like using that because as you grow into your leadership space, whatever that might look like, you bring your own uh, capabilities in, and you've learned some things along the way, and you'll apply those things on an as needs basis. But this thing around reflective practice, around looking after the you part of it, is I think neglected because and this is a view, my view, my view only, sorry, that um, in leadership positions, you're expected to be infallible, leading the team, not making mistakes, and when there are hiccups along the way, being picked up on that can be quite confronting, and not just
Yeah.
from day-to-day operations, but if your board or a senior management team sort of looks at you and go, look, we need you to do this better. It's not necessarily an attack. It's more an observation that we need to succeed, and for us to succeed, we need you at your absolute best, or as much as you can achieve that. And so I really resonate with what you're saying around building that resilience, not so much as an armor, but another piece of thinking that you can bring to the fore, which leads me to the next question for you, if I can, Russell, or theme at least, around this idea that reflective practice can seem to be a solo pursuit, but taking external feedback is an important part of that. How do you rate that bit around external feedback to help your reflective practice and building that resilience that you've been talking about?
It's incredibly important because that is a conversation with a coach, so it is part of it. And for me, it goes back to what we've talked about before, this lovely word of feedback. On occasion, I do think we need to find it. We need to go to a thesaurus and find a better word for feedback, because and I do this all the time in lots of sessions I facilitate. It's like, let's pretend, that I work with you. I may or may not be your line manager, but it's like, well, imagine I've caught you in the corridor. It's like I caught you on a virtual call. And go, oh, I'm glad I caught you. I want to give you some feedback. I ask everybody, what's your immediate reaction about what's going to happen? And 99% of the time, people go, I'm about to get told off, you know? Um, so we need to support people to understand that that's not necessarily always the case, you know? Um, and one of the dimensions of being resilient is your support network. So you have an opportunity to cultivate a fabulous support network that really enables you to be at your best, that will tell you home truths. will be open and honest with you. And you find those individuals as well that you understand that are just are never going to give you the feedback that you need. So, on those ones, stop trying. But I have, it's really, really important. And so I would, as a leader, you do have to ask your team, some version of like, how am I doing? It's immediately, as people are watching and listening now, it's like, how does the idea of that sound to you? It's like people going, yeah, I'm fine with that. Or it's like, no, thank you. No, I really don't want to do that because I'm frightened of the answer. So where the resilience piece can help is one of the dimensions of resilience is confidence. So all of these business aspects of these dimensions I'm talking about on this thing called the resilience wheel that I utilize, which is on the website. If it's not, I'm not self-promotional. I know I've been talking about these dimensions of resilience. It's just these are where they're coming from, and they're all interconnected. So you don't have to go and work on your confidence to get to necessarily to feel more comfortable asking for feedback. You can engage with different aspects of your resilience wheel. There's 7 on them, and they all have knock-on positive effects on the others. So your route to building your confidence, is not necessarily by specifically working on your confidence. So for example, I've talked before about building upon your strengths. So when we play to our strengths, those things that naturally energize us, it builds natural resilience and natural confidence. So I'm just a massive advocate of play to your strengths. So you can use that as a framework for the feedback that you ask for, so you can ask the questions around. So in terms of how am I doing as a leader, you can sort of say, where have you noticed that I've been energized? Or, actually you thought that actually I got some really good outcomes. How was I behaving? What was I doing? What was I saying? How was I coming across, essentially? And so, that's to start with, as I said right at the start, start with the good. So it's like, talk to me about what I'm doing well. Talk to me about what you appreciate about what I do. Talk to me about actually how I support you when I have, and then, it's like, go, okay, so the other bits, equally as important. Talk to me about when it hasn't gone quite so well, or it looks like I've been struggling. Now, for you to be able to, go ask your team members all of this, I totally, totally get that you have to have a level of comfortableness inside yourself doing those things. I get it. And I just, so I'm lucky in terms of who I am as a person. I just knew decades ago that doing some form of asking people, so how am I doing? Was something that I could do. I have had a lot of feedback in my time. An incredible amount of feedback, because I've just sort of cultivated asking for it. And not all of it has been easy to hear. Huge chunks of it have been, very, very brutal, because of just the circumstances that you're in. And some people chose those opportunities to be extremely unkind. However, by keeping doing it, I'm learning. So it's incredibly important to cultivate a really great support network, people that you can chat with, to just add to your own personal reflections. And one of the specific ways in which you build your confidence, that from all of the research from Albert Bandura, is about actually just chatting with others, about this is what I think and feel about myself, and enabling those others around you to say, well, actually, I've not observed that. I've not seen it. That's not what I've observed. I've seen you do this. So I'm just reminded of the confirmation bias that I mentioned before. So it's also really good to remember that confirmation bias is that sweeping generalization as human beings, we have beliefs and we have our thoughts about what's the way the world should work. And we are actually searching to confirm our view of the world. Okay. So cultivating openness and curiosity that we talked about is about challenging your confirmation bias, because it's like, right, I think this about the world, or I think this is going in this way. Talk to me. and people go, yeah, I concur with you on that one. And actually others will go, no, I completely disagree with you on that one. And you have to listen to that a bit more on occasion. And once again, as a leader, if you go around the table and you get, I'm really sanitizing it now, but literally you go around and ask for loads of feedback from your team and it comes back as, yep, it's all good, you're great. There's a risk of groupthink there. So, you know, that's how you go, well, it's absolutely fabulous. Everybody's gone, yeah, it's going good, plenty of feedback. We're all working well together. But we all think that, which could be, it could be true. It absolutely could be true. But yeah, it's working well. So great. Let's celebrate. It's working well. But there just needs to be a part of you to go, I might just go and ask a few others. Am I going to ask some of my stakeholders or my customers, or I'll just go ask a few others to go, is our view of the world, is it as good as we think it is? So yes, the confirmation bias. I've closed that loop in my mind.
No, I appreciate that. I was going to come back to it, and yeah, I had a sense you would go down that track. The one thing that stood out in that response for me, Russell, is when you're seeking feedback, you've got, and I would say 99% of the world will provide you with constructive feedback. You just get that 1% of assholes that'll come at you with what I term destructive feedback, because they're just the wrong people in the world that don't want to give you constructive feedback because they don't care one way and the other, and that can have impacts even on seasoned veterans in that leadership space. That was really tough to hear, particularly if it goes from being work related to something more personal about you, and then the reflective bit goes out the window because it's an ego bruising process. And yeah, I think we've all been hit by that particular man or woman that we've worked with that's just decided to be destructive in the way that they approach the world, and you can't escape that. I think for my own learning and for the learning of others, if you've got some feelings about something, think about what you need to say and unpack that with what you're really getting at. Because I believe in my heart that when someone comes at you with destructive feedback, they've got an issue with you or something unresolved themselves that it can't express any other way than becoming aggressive or providing feedback that just doesn't reflect where their own headspace is at. And I think the more kind leaders among us will try and dig out what that is to try and resolve a situation. But me personally, I don't invest a lot of time in people that take that pathway, because there's so much more to your life as a leader and outside of work, that concentrating, like you said, on just the bad stuff is the I think it's almost the path of least resistance to go, the world has gone to poo, things aren't working out, easy to wallow in that side of things without saying, hey, everything's pretty good except for this one little hiccup. But that takes time, and some of us do that better than others, and I'm not saying I do that well. I think it's an ongoing conversation, and at times, like you said, is to think back and absorb some of what's coming in rather than react to it. And that was going to be my next question before getting to the last theme here, is that
Can I
react.
just jump in
Yeah.
1 second? So,
Yep.
so I'm just mindful. We've been talking about this word feedback, and so there is a way that I'd share with people about how you can do it for the things that you appreciate and the things that you'd like to be different.
Sure.
I absolutely do not want to patronize anybody that's listening now, but there's so it's not, it's like, so it is a model. There are lots of feedback models out there, and I've found this really useful over a lifetime. And sometimes I have to personally get a script in my head of the first few sentences that I want to say, if it's like I'm actually wanting to go to somebody because there's a behavior that they're doing that I'm finding difficult and finding challenging. So this model is absolutely thinking about, if whenever you're giving feedback, whether it's the stuff that you really appreciate that you want to do more of, it's about the behavior. And actually, when there's behavior somebody's doing that you want to be different, remember it's about the behavior. Okay. So really get that in your head. And you sometimes have to think about, What is it that they're doing that I'm enjoying, and what is it that they're doing that I'm not enjoying? So you sometimes have to reflect on that so that you can say the feedback. So it's essentially it's a three sort of sentence structure to start with. There's a bit more to it. It's a three sentence structure. So it's a version of like you want to talk about a situation. You want to talk about the behavior that you saw them do or you heard them say, and then the impact it had upon you. Okay, that's what you start with. So, for example, Eric, I am genuinely really appreciating in our conversation that we're having now. So, the situation, the podcast, I'm appreciating how much you are listening to me, you're empathizing with me, and that you're reflecting back the comments that I make and you're building upon them. And the impact it's having upon me is that I feel listened to, I feel heard, I feel understood, and I feel valued. That's a feedback model. Okay. The other flip side of it could be, so Eric, been chatting for a while now on this podcast, and what I've noticed is that you've been interrupting me a lot, and you've been talking over me, and you've sort of dismissed a few things that I've said. So the impact it's had upon me is that I feel as though actually I feel undervalued. I don't think you really are interested in my point of view, and I feel really rather despondent right now. It's a model, it's like I wanted to talk about when I saw, I heard, I thought, I felt. That's the model. Okay. You're avoiding as much as you just are avoiding, you made me feel, because that's an argument. So I know that it's for everybody that's listening now. And then what you need to do is those three sentences, then you need to pause. Then you have to bite your tongue. Then you have to bite your lip, and wait to see what the other person does. And then it needs to shift into a conversation, a quality human conversation. And it needs to finish with the sentence of, from the individual that started it, my expectation is. You haven't done the feedback properly until you've landed with my expectation is. So if a leader's listening now and there's a behavior change that you want from an individual, about how you permanently want them to behave, it's just you haven't genuinely had the proper conversation until you finish it with, okay, so thanks for the chat. Just to be clear, going forward, my expectation is of their behavior. If you don't do that, you've not really had the conversation, because you've got to need to sort of hit them between the eyes of like, the expectation of my behavior going forward is. So I don't know if that's helpful. We've been talking about this word feedback a lot, and we're not great at it as a human race. And it's just, that is an approach to take for the behaviors that we're enjoying, we want people to keep doing. And actually, if there's behaviors that people are doing that we want them to change, it's exactly the same model for that.
Well, let me start, Russell, by saying thank you for jumping ahead. I was going to ask you around the tips to give, and this one's a good one around feedback, because like you, I hear that word quite a lot, but I didn't realize the end bit about closing off the feedback loop is to say, hey, from this point on, my expectation is this, or some way to close it. And that's eminently useful, because none of what you said seems intuitively difficult to do. It's just you need to stay to a script. And when you said the word script, I'm like, yeah, I have to run it through my own head as well. It wouldn't come out natural. And in me saying this, I have to say, or I have to ask you, sorry, giving feedback is not a natural process either, is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah, okay.
It's not. Yeah. It has to be conscious and overt. And a sort of tiny addition as leaders in terms of a tip. Get into the habit. So I'm going to sound a bit contrary now, but just bear with me. But just get into the habit of the people that you work with, either colleagues, your boss, even, and the people. So just go around and get in the habit of doing the first three sentences of like, oh, I've noticed that you did that. And I thought that was really good, be specific about the behavior, and don't finish with my expectation is that you'll keep doing that. Yeah. Okay. So that's me being contrary, but just get into the habit of just doing the first few sentences, so that everybody around you gets used to hearing these things, so that when you need to segue into, So could just have a little chat about that behavior I saw over there. When you do that, I feel really concerned, or when you do that, I feel really rather frustrated. You can get, so that's just an additional bit around that.
Words of wisdom, Russell. I was going to say, if I was talking to my chair, I wouldn't be ending the conversation with, well, my expectations going forward is blah. Well, no, we're not quite there. And yeah, there's the chain up and the chain down, I guess. Russell, this has been an interesting conversation, and I do appreciate your insights here. The conversation around reflective leadership, building resilience in that space is one that I think we will continue to have, because one thing that I note in the leaders that I've spoken to, when you bring in that time factor, as you age and mature into your leadership roles over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you're at different points in your own professional development. These things come in waves, and I think you learn as you go. What I don't think we do well through that journey is look at, do I reflect enough? Is it quality, and to what end? Because at the start of this conversation, and just to wrap up and close the circle here, you mentioned,
Mm.
and I don't think you used the word in this way, but what's your why? What's your value proposition for being in a leadership position? And that to me is really important. And it's not often that I ask this of leaders face to face, because I don't know how to quite put the question to them. But not only is it, well, it's a two-parter. What's your why, and how do you make that align to your leadership? And that can be highly personal. So I've never quite crossed that Rubicon and sort of asked that question. But the why bit I think is important, because it's part of that reflective practice that you talked about. If you don't understand your why, the hell are you reflecting on? Or
Yeah,
could you?
absolutely. Absolutely. And so there isn't an easy way to get people to think about their why. And so you have to start somewhere. So the various questions. So it's back to your purpose. You ask a lot of people, what's your purpose? Many people are going, I don't know what you're on about. Uh, it's not one of those that I haven't yet, unless there's people listening now, watching now, that haven't got a question that nails it in one go. I don't think it exists, because we're going to, what's your values? What's your attitude to your life? How can you get out of bed each day? One that can really start is, tell me about a time when you've recently felt really proud, and then really, really explore that, because the reason they feel proud is that because they've done something, they've played to their strengths, their skills, their capabilities in some way, shape, or form. So it's in there. It's like, so how do you hone that? How could you turn that to a purpose? So my purpose is, by the year 2025, what year was that? 2025. I want to positively affect 100,000 people. That's my purpose. Okay. And right now I'm up to 44,220-ish, and the positively effect is that I want to support people to have a realization moment, a light bulb moment, to go from confused face to, ah, I get it now. Or actually, this is how I can translate some of this theory into practice. Oh, I know what I'm going to go away and do, about actually being a better leader, or actually making some changes around things. Because that absolutely has a wonderful impact upon me. It gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling. So, that's my purpose. And then underneath that, there'll be some goals to achieve the purpose, if that makes sense. So purpose is sort of bigger and broader and more overarching. So then when you get people to got that purpose, then it's like, so what's your leadership purpose that's alongside that, essentially? So I don't think there is a singular question. It's like, what's your why? How can you get out of bed? What makes you proud? Any idea what your values are? What's important to you? It's all of those.
Yeah, I see a connect in my head between that and being able to reflect deeply about issues. Because if you know your why, then the reflective
This
bit
is it.
shouldn't be that hard. Well, shouldn't be that hard. But if you need help, then you need help. to get there. And for what this is worth, Russell, and this has been a really interesting conversation. I hadn't thought of it in this way, that the why that I bring to my leadership in my own professional life is very different to the why that I have around my family and friends, and it's different to the why on things that interest me that have nothing to do with work and nothing to do with my family. And at their core, it's about a passion for something for me. And I think if you can discover what that looks like, more power to you. But I think part of being human beings is that we're searching for that, and that might sometimes change. So I'm not saying it's a fixed thing in time. But Russell Harvey, this has been great. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Eric. I've loved it too. So thank you very much for all of your brilliant questions and your reflections and playing it back to me and making me feel valued. I really genuinely appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. For those listening, this has been the Talking Leadership TV podcast series. Thank you for following. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll catch everyone on the next edition of the podcast.